Hello and welcome to Through the Bible with Les Feldick. An Oklahoma rancher and farmer, Les Feldick has been teaching homestyle Bible classes for 20 years in Iowa, Oklahoma, and Texas. Les Feldick's unique style of Bible teaching has made the books of the Bible come to life. When Les is teaching, it's so interesting that people say time just seems to fly by. And now, here is Les Feldick.
And again, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are out in television. We're glad to have you with us. And for those of you here in the studio, again, we always appreciate so much your coming in. And I've had the studio class turn to Romans chapter 1 once again. But for those of you on television, we're going to let you know for a few programs in a row that we do have all of these videotapes ready to mail. And we've put 12 programs on one 6-hour video in order to hold the costs down. And of course each video has now been transcribed word by word. In fact, I've told the people, and I've even told Keith as he prepared, take out some of my superfluous words, take out some of my now-thens and what have you, because I know I overuse them. But he said then it wouldn't be Les Feldick. So the little books are just word for word as they come off the tape. And we trust that since a lot of other folk have been blessed by them, if you haven't gotten any, you call us or write to us and we'll get you something in the mail. As I mentioned last program, the first thing we like to suggest is let us just send you a list of all the table of contents of all the various videos and where they happen to be covering the scripture, and then you can order from that. Some people would just as soon get maybe tapes 11, 12, and 13, I guess, 14. Those are the ones that we did on Revelation. And I suppose we've sent more of them out than any other one. But whatever. We just want our television audience to know that these are available. Now I think we'll get right back into the book and pick up where we left off. And I probably should stop right here. And from here until we get to chapter 3, God is, in so many words, building his case, just like a prosecuting attorney. God is building his case against the whole human race. And he's going to categorize them into 3 areas. We're looking now, first and foremost, at the first one that he is going to conclude as being guilty, and that is the immoral. Or maybe I should even say the amoral. They have no morals whatsoever. They're destitute of any morality. Then we're going to come in the next series of verses to the moral man or woman. And then we're going to come to, believe it or not, the religious individual. And the conclusion is going to be on all 3 guilty. And then Paul is going to come to that tremendous conclusion in Romans 3, there is none that doeth good. There is none that doeth righteousness. They are all become unprofitable. So as we come into this next series of verses, again, I always like to remind my audience, my classes, that I'm not looking down my nose, I'm not judging, I'm just simply showing what the Scripture says. And it is God building his case now against all of humanity. But he's going to start with those, of course, who are most obviously guilty, and that is the immoral. Now we saw just a little bit in our closing remarks in the last program, verse 24, because they now push God out of their thinking, they have now begun to worship anything and everything but the one true God. And as a result, they open themselves up to the immoral lifestyle. I read an article here a year or 2 ago by a university secular individual. He was not writing with any, I don't like the word religious, but once in a while you have to use it. He was not writing with any religious overtones. But he made the statement that unless a society is guided and controlled by religious values, they cannot last. Even if it's a religion that you and I would not agree with, it still has guidelines that keeps those people under a certain spectrum of behavior which you have to have or you can't have a society. When you fall into anarchy, when you fall into no restraint, you can't last. It's just that simple. No nation ever has. Rome is a good example. The Roman Empire. My, they had the greatest military machine at that time. And yet Rome, the city itself, became so corrupt, politically, economically, and morally, that nobody had to come in and whip them. They defeated themselves, and Rome fell. And of course, that's what historians have been screaming about America. We're going down the same road that Rome went, and we're going to destroy ourselves, not with some outside power coming in and taking us over. We're going to destroy ourselves from within. All right, so now we're going to build the case, or God does, against the immoral segment of humanity. Verse 24, as we looked at last program, wherefore God gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts or the desires of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Well, there was nothing to restrain them, because they were now under nothing more than idolatry. And idolatry has no moral code. In fact, I've often told my classes over the years, if you go back and you study idolatrous and some of the mythological religions of the world, at the very core of their operating is immorality. The pagan temples of the old Greek and Roman gods were just glorified houses of prostitution in the name of religion, see? And so it just followed that when you come from the idolatry of verse 23, you now come to the immorality of verse 24. But you see, mankind is never satisfied to stay on this level. He is determined to what, I remember one young medical student who was, how should I say, he was struggling with the meager income that he had at that time, nothing like what they are now. He was an intern, not a student. He was an intern. And at that time, I think they were making about $25 a month and just struggling. And he was married, and he says, you know, Les, I've come to the conclusion, the only way to really get wealth in this world is to do something that contributes to the degeneracy of society. And then he named them. Alcohol, prostitution, gambling. I was thinking he had 4, no, I'm thinking. But see, anything that degenerates society, people are going to buy it. I remember having somebody tell me back in the Depression, all of these same things, people had money for that. They didn't have money for food and shelter and clothes for their kids, but they had money for their booze. They had money for their immorality. And so it's always been, and I guess it always will be, until finally the wrath of God is going to fall. All right, now then go on to verse 25. Now from that level of immorality, sexual immorality between the male and the female, now they change the truth of God into the lie. Now here again, the truth, I think you can always put in the very name of Christ himself. He is the truth. But you see, Jesus put his stamp of approval upon the marriage relationship, didn't he? God put his stamp of approval upon the marriage relationship way back in the garden. And so all the way through Scripture, Paul says in Hebrews, the marriage bed is undefiled. God says it's honorable in all. And so under God's restraints, all these things are perfectly not only normal, they're what God has given. But you see, man has taken the God-given things and has used it under the influence, of course, of the adversary of Satan. So they changed the truth of God into a lie, worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. And now again the Scripture says God gave them up to a yet lower level of lifestyle. And now what is it? Vile affections. Now we don't like these languages. I don't. But the book has got it, and we have to teach it. So as a result of their original behavior of rejection, God now gives them up to even something worse. Now they go into vile affection. Even their women. Now, I don't like to put any connotation on here that is not as it should be. But you'll note that Satan started with the woman in the garden. And this is not a put down to our women, not at all. It's just a fact of human history. Satan started with the woman. And you watch even through Israel's history. In fact, I can take you back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 44. A lot of times I don't intend to do this. Jeremiah 44. Because I don't want somebody to say, where do you get that? Well, I get it from the book, or I wouldn't speak it. Jeremiah 44. Drop down to verse 15. Jeremiah 44, verse 15. Now this is Israel, God's covenant people, who had the temple right in their midst, had the priesthood, had a good part of the Old Testament. And look what they're doing. Chapter 44, verse 15, then all the men who knew that their wives had burned incense to other gods. Who was burning the incense? The women were, the wives. And all the women that stood by, a great multitude, even all the people that dwelled in the land of Egypt and Pathros, answered Jeremiah, saying, as for the word that thou hast spoken unto us in the name of the Lord, we'll not hearken unto you. Got the attitude? We're not going to listen to what you've got to say. Now, I always like to remind my classes, you know, Jeremiah lived at the time of the Babylonian siege. And when the Babylonians finally took over Jerusalem, where do you suppose they found Jeremiah? Well, he was down in a dungeon. Why? The Jews didn't like what he said. And so rather than listen to his prophecies, rather than adhere to what God was trying to tell him, they threw him in prison. And that's where the Babylonians found him. But see, this is why he's called the weeping prophet. He could see what Israel was heading into. And they're going deeper and deeper into these same kind of sins that we're going to see in Romans 1. All right, now look at verse 17. But they said, we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth to burn incense unto not the king of heaven, but the what? The queen of heaven. Oh, who was that? Well, a female goddess. And every great idolatrous religion has their female goddess. It's been part and parcel of idolatry from day one. Well, we won't take time to read the rest of these, but I just wanted you to see it was the women of Israel who led the way, and it was precipitated by the worship of a female goddess. All right, so verse 26 of Romans 1. It starts not with the men, but with the women who entered into a homosexual relationship. Rather than that which was even natural immorality up in verse 24, now they go into the vile affections of the homosexual lifestyle. And so their women did change the natural use, that is, of sexual intercourse, into that which is against nature. The book said it, I didn't. Verse 27, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust, one toward another, men with men. Plain enough? Come back to Genesis 19. And this is the first time that the Scripture deals with what God calls an abomination. It's what it was then, it's been ever since, and it still is.